If you've ever rolled your eyes at a romantasy book, perhaps because of tropes or toxic relationships, poor writing, or just the endless enemies to lovers plots, then I get it. So if you're a romantasy skeptic, then stick around, because Alison and I are going to share 10 romantasy books that we think might just change your mind. And I'm so excited because today's video is a collaboration with Alison from Alison Talks Books, and her channel features really well-researched video essays on the culture of reading, and her perspective is just always absolutely fascinating, always gives me something to think about, and I just love her channel, so I'm so happy to be doing this with her. Now, before I hand you over to Alison for the first recommendation, I do just want to really quickly share some of the most common reasons that people don't like the genre. Now, I do think a lot of it comes down to repetition, because you get quite a lot of formulaic writing within the romantasy genre, and you kind of see the brooding hero and the fiery heroine who is always young and always just the best at everything. Like, there is nothing she can't do. And yeah, they start off as enemies, they absolutely detest each other, and then sometimes seemingly from nowhere, they're in love and there is a load of spice, and I do think that this formula does get used quite a lot. I think the most common complaints are really poor world building and the fantasy world just being used as a backdrop to the romance, rather than the romance and the fantasy being equally as important and the world being very fleshed out. Poor writing is another common complaint, as is too much spice and characters not being well developed, and there being too many blank canvas characters or self-insert characters, which is where a character doesn't have that much in the way of personality quirks or traits, so that the reader can just insert themselves into the story. Other complaints that I've heard about romantasy is that they feature a lot of toxic relationships and abusive dynamics, as well as that they're very heteronormative and they tend to be, you know, man and woman fall in love after initially hating each other, like I mentioned before. And then aside from that, there are some people who have issues with the amount of profanity that there is in the typical romantasy as well. So yeah, a pretty mixed bag of complaints, and we think that we've chosen some books that avoid a lot of these pitfalls. So I'm gonna hand you over to Alison now for the first recommendation.
Hi, I'm Alison from Alison Talks Books. I figured I should probably introduce myself since I'm not on my own channel at the moment. I am going to be sharing some books that I enjoyed that were romantasies, and I understand not everyone loves romantasy, and that's okay. These picks are kind of more targeted at people who don't like romantasy but wish they did, because they like the idea of romance mixed with fantasy, but it just hasn't yet worked for them. One thing that I've seen from people who don't tend to like a lot of the popular romantasies is not everyone enjoys a lot of spice. I personally don't mind a couple spicy scenes in a book, and I don't think one or two scenes makes the entire book just smut. That being said, I also understand not enjoying that being in your books. So for the first book, I'm going to give a no spice pick, which is Daughter of the Moon Goddess. In this book, we follow the main character, Xing Yin, who is the daughter of the Moon Goddess. The Moon Goddess, however, was trapped by the Celestial Emperor, so her daughter goes to the Celestial Kingdom in disguise in order to try to find a way to free her mother. Xing Yin works her way up from being a servant to the companion for academic sorts of studies to the Emperor's son. There are elements of Chinese mythology. You have things like dragons and dragon eggs, as well as just the reference to the Moon Goddess and the Celestial Emperor and all those little things. That was all really nice. I will say there is a love triangle, and I know that some people are super anti-love triangle, so I'm going to let you know that now. I've never really understood being completely anti-love triangle. I feel like a lot of people are like, oh, those don't exist in real life. I feel like they do exist in real life, so they don't really bother me. If they bother you, this might not be the pick. I have seen some people speculate on this one as to whether it should be shelved, in the adult section or the YA section. I will say the writing does feel a little bit more on the adult side to me. There is definitely a prose that is a little bit more advanced than what I would generally see in the YA section. I think a lot of the confusion comes from the fact that this doesn't have a lot of spice. I do think a 16-year-old could totally read it though, so I don't know if that matters all that much, but it's a pretty good book.
For book 9, I have Daughter of the Forest by Juliet Marilla, and if you've written Romantasy off as shallow with poor world building, then definitely start here. So this was actually written in 1999, so it was written before we even had the term Romantasy, and it definitely isn't like a lot of modern romantasies that we have today. However, if it was written today, I do think it would fall into that category. So this is actually a retelling of the Brothers Grimm tale of the Six Swans, and it's set against this really lush Celtic landscape. This has genuinely breathtaking world building. It is so good, and if you think ancient forests and quiet magic, nature magic, folklore, and yeah, Celtic inspired tradition, then you'd be on the right track. I'm going to warn you that it is a little bit slower than the romantasies that we're used to today, but I think in a really good way, because it really takes time to build the world and develop the characters. So we follow Saoirse, and while she is a young heroine like we're used to seeing, she is a teenager, she's not like the heroines that you get in a lot of more modern romantasy books. And she has quite a sad backstory because her mother died in childbirth, and she has 6 brothers who she's very close to, and eventually when her father remarries, the stepmother places a curse on them which basically only she can break, and she has to complete a very difficult task, and it's going to take her a long time, and she has to be silent throughout. And we really follow her journey as well as her 6 brothers' journey. Saoirse goes through so much in this book, and there are parts that are hard to read. She is a strong heroine, but she's not strong in the sort of stereotypical way that I think a lot of more modern romantasy books fall into. Speaking of her hardships though, I do want to mention that there is quite a graphic scene in this, and whilst the aftermath is well handled, I know that some people didn't appreciate having that graphic scene on page. So if there's anything that you think might be triggering for you, then do look up the content warnings first. Now, romance wise, this is definitely slow burn and it's definitely more subtle. So the romance doesn't kick in until later on in the book. So there's a lot of rich plot alongside it. However, the romance is important to the plot and it is very well done. It's the type of romance that's built on resilience and friendship. So there's no enemies to lovers dynamic going on here if that's not your thing. Overall, I would say this is a really well written book. It's very richly detailed, and yeah, it does have a little bit of a slower start, which I was absolutely fine with because it's sort of part of creating that rich world. But if you're used to more of the popular modern romantasies, it will feel a little bit different. But I think once you get into this, you'll be really into it. This one feels more like historical fiction blended with fantasy and romance and almost like a literary fantasy. It's definitely proof that the romantasy genre can carry real emotional and thematic depth.
Number 8 is actually a collaboration between the Dungeons and Dragons group Critical Role and Thea Guanzin, which is Tusk Love. This book is set in Critical Role's world. If you are unfamiliar with them, they play Dungeons and Dragons online to an audience. I've seen many people say that they feel like the world in romantasy books is not well developed. And I think that this one kind of has a little bit of an advantage with that because the world was already well developed before the book came into place. So the story is being written into a world that's already really fleshed out, even though the story itself doesn't necessarily do a ton of world building. It is pretty small in scope. In this book, we have Guinevere, a merchant's daughter. She is transporting her dowry to her fiance, who she has never met before. her parents have done an arranged marriage because they want the influence that this noble man can give them. They are a struggling merchant family, and they are kind of at their wits' end. Because of that, she is very, very protective of the luggage that her family has asked her to carry across a long distance. Since they are struggling financially, they send her on this trip without enough protection. The caravan gets attacked by bandits, and she is, to some extent, left to fend for herself until we get Oscar, a half-orc who decides to do the right thing and help her get to her destination. One complaint I've heard a lot for people who wish they liked Romantasy but just don't like Romantasy is that the genre oftentimes has a lot of self-insert characters. Basically, characters where you could easily just imagine that you are them and they have no real personality or traits or things that makes them uniquely them. I would not say that about Guinevere. She's definitely not a self-insert. She is very consistent throughout the entire book. Her background is very obvious. The way she thinks of things is very obvious, and it's very distinct. So if you're just kind of not into the whole self-insert female main character, this is a good one for that. Throughout the book, she thinks about the expectations of her parents and how much she has done to try to meet their approval, and the juxtaposition between the relationships she experienced before the journey and the relationships she gets to experience during the journey is what makes this book so compelling.
Okay, wow, that definitely made me want to read Tusk Love. I haven't read that one, so that's going on my TBR. Thanks, Alison. Coming in at number 7, we have Paladin's Grace by T. Kingfisher. I think it's really interesting how T. Kingfisher isn't typically associated with romantasy. She's more thought of as, I think horror comes to mind first when you think of T. Kingfisher, actually. But she's written some really great romantasies, and she's a great writer. So I would definitely give this one a go, especially if the main reason you don't like romantasy is because of toxic relationships and all the characters being young and being self-insert characters. There are no toxic relationships in this, and our main protagonists are in their mid to late 30s, so not the typical 18-year-olds that you see. And again, we have a relationship that's built on friendship and trust and respect, and it's two people who really need to heal, and they help each other to heal, which is just really beautiful. This one also isn't overly dramatic. It's more cozy, but it's not pure cozy. There are some darker themes going on as well, which I would kind of expect from T. Kingfisher, given the other sorts of things that she writes. We follow Stephen, who is a sock-knitting paladin whose god has sadly died, and now he is godless, and he feels like he's lost a lot of his purpose. And we also follow Grace, and Grace is a master perfumer. She's very clumsy, and she's got quite a distinctive personality. I really liked Grace, and they have such a funny meet cute as well. It's not like I've seen again in other books. And the pair of them quickly become embroiled in a political assassination conspiracy, which they kind of have to work through together. And also there is a serial killer on the loose who is going around severing people's heads, which is why I said there are some darker elements in this, even though overall I would say that this is a cozy romantasy. And it's quite funny as well, and it's quite dryly funny at times, which I really liked. Overall, this one's for you if you want a cozier romantasy, but something that isn't shallow and still has that depth and has great writing and a beautiful romance that is built very much on trust and humour and friendship.
Number 6 is The Fairy Godmother by Mercedes Lackey. This book was written in 2004, and I honestly think that is something you could definitely explore if you haven't enjoyed a lot of the books that are getting released right now. When this book was released, romantasy was not a term that we were using. Since this book was written a couple decades ago, a lot of the things that we're used to at the moment are not in this book, and the way that it kind of is structured and formatted is definitely distinct from a lot of the major hits right now. The Fairy Godmother is a fairy tale world where the magic system is centered around something called the tradition. Basically, whenever a person has a lot of things happen to them that meet a certain stereotype, they build magic around themselves to try to make a certain ending occur. Elena, who is the girl we are following, has an evil stepmother, evil stepsisters who have taken advantage of her father. Her father's passed away. She works really hard. She's asked to do all the work and she is starved. So she's Cinderella, basically. And in this world, whenever you have the sort of circumstances that would cause you to be a Cinderella-like character, the magic system tries to make that happen for you. However, the main character in this particular kingdom cannot have this natural ending occur because the prince is only 11 years old. There is some sort of danger in this magic system to having all of this potential magic energy go unrealized, so she is offered the position to become an apprentice to a fairy godmother. As a fairy godmother, she's kind of expected to just do a lot of work, learn a lot, and be there for tons of different people, experiencing different potential plot lines across many different kingdoms. She's also sort of expected to remain celibate to some extent, even though that's kind of a gray area. And while she never was interested in anyone from her hometown, she doesn't necessarily know if she likes the idea of being by herself forever. Eventually, a love story does happen in the book, and it becomes a pretty prominent part of the story. You'll enjoy this book if you like a book that is willing to meander a little bit and doesn't have the tightest pacing. For example, the love interest isn't even introduced in this book until 50% into the book, so there's obviously a lot of plot outside of the romance, but the romance does become pretty prominent in the second half. To that note, though, there is a group of people who would dislike this book, and those are people who have zero tolerance for info dumping. I honestly don't mind some info dumping sometimes. I don't mind when the fairy godmother is teaching her what it means to be a fairy godmother. There are a couple chapters of that. And if you can't handle a little bit of that and you really don't love when info dumping happens for any reason ever, then this is probably going to annoy you. If that is not a deal breaker for you, it's an amazing read.
Coming in at number 5, we have Radiance by Grace Dravin, and this is one that's part of a series, so this is part of the Wraith King series. What I loved about this one is it completely flips a classic trope on its head. So I think one of the things that annoys a lot of people about Romantasy is that it's often two absolutely gorgeous people who meet and inexplicably find each other absolutely gorgeous, because of course they do. This one isn't like that at all. This one features an arranged marriage for political reasons, and the two people, for a start, they're actually different species. One is human and one is not, which I know sounds a little weird, but it's really done well. Anyway, when they meet, they find each other absolutely repulsive. Like physically repulsive. They can barely look at each other. So it takes them a little bit of time to get used to each other. However, they're not starting off as enemies or anything like that. They are uncovering each other's wit and each other's personality, and their bond of friendship starts to grow. And it's, you know, when you meet someone and I think the kinder that person is and the more compassionate that person is, the more and more attractive that they tend to look to you. At least I know that's how it is for me. Like, if I meet someone and I think that maybe they look attractive at first, but then they turn out to be just the worst person, then I can never view them as attractive from there. They just look ugly from that point onwards. And, you know, vice versa, that I think very kind people, they sort of radiate attractiveness even if you didn't initially think that they were that attractive. And that's kind of what we have happening in this book, and it's really well done. This one's also got a really compelling plot outside of any of the romance, and it's got some good political intrigue in there as well, if that's something that appeals to you. Another thing about this one is it's got definite moments of humour in, as well as very tender moments. There is some spice scenes in this, but it's not overly heavy on the spice. But yes, if you're tired of impossibly beautiful people falling in love and having that kind of insta-love, then this one might be a great one to try.
An easy addition to a romantasy list is T. Kingfisher all the time. I'm going to add on Swordheart. Hala is a widow who has been living with her deceased husband's uncle. The uncle, who is quite wealthy, passes away and unexpectedly leaves his wealth and fortunes to Hala instead of to his actual family by blood. We are obviously in like a medieval feeling world where women don't necessarily have a lot of power. And because of that situation, the family is putting her in a position where she's going to be forced to marry back into the family so that they have access to the wealth that she was given. She's basically trapped in a bedroom. She can't get out. She can't go anywhere. She's feeling pretty desperate. She really doesn't like them. And she does, self-harm adjacent warning. She contemplates the idea of just taking her life with the sword that is in the room. She has this weird internal monologue of falling on a sword. This is all in the very beginning of the book, for the record. When she unsheathes the sword, out comes a man, and we discover that there is a man who is cursed and is attached to the sword and is basically forced to help whoever is the current owner of the sword. Since she technically owns the house that the sword is within, she becomes the owner of this guy, and he basically helps free her from this situation that she doesn't want to be in, and they go on this journey to try to find a way for her to claim this inheritance. It definitely has some comical moments. There are parts of the story that can be quite funny. One obvious difference between this book and some of the most popular romantasies out there right now is that Hala never becomes very physically strong. She doesn't learn magic or learn how to do combat and then become the most powerful woman in the world. I don't actually mind those stories that much, but I have seen a lot of people who don't like romantasy talking about one of the reasons they don't like the genre is because by the end, the female main character becomes very overpowered. That does not happen in this story. Hala is weak, and she stays weak. However, she uses her emotional intelligence, and she uses how she talks to people and how she processes things to get out of sticky situations instead of just becoming traditionally strong or powerful. For example, she will lean into stereotypes of authority figures who talk to her in order for them to dismiss her as a silly woman and not get in her way. So I kind of like that representation of a different form of strong woman. Not all of us can wield a sword, and not all of us have magical powers, but we can all learn how to navigate the world that we are within, even when we don't have any obvious advantages.
Thanks, Alison. So on to book 3. And by the way, me and Alison had no idea that we would both be picking a T. Kingfisher book until we spoke about which books we were going for. So I think that really shows that T. Kingfisher is a hidden gem in the romantasy world, even though she's not really associated with the romantasy. Anyway, on to book 4. And look, I'm never going to shut up about this one. This is Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. And if your complaint is that romantasy is badly written, this will obliterate that complaint, okay? This is gorgeously written. And if you love lyrical writing, you'll love this one. So this is a retelling of Dracula's Brides from the perspective of Constanta, Dracula's first bride, and it's done in the form of a letter to Dracula where she goes over their relationship. Now, this does have a lot of toxic relationship dynamic in it, which I know is something that some people want to avoid. However, this does it so well. It's not an unrealistic portrayal. I personally found this book quite healing in a way from that point of view. It goes into abusive relationships in a way that's very realistic, and it doesn't romanticize or glamorize that abuse at all, but it doesn't flatten it. For me, it hits something deeply personal, and I think if you've ever been in a relationship that was really about control and survival, and maybe you've blamed yourself for staying in that for too long or something like that, then this might really appeal to you. Or, definitely check trigger warnings again if you're worried that there could be something triggering in there, of course. However, this isn't just about toxic relationships, because there is also really beautiful relationship dynamics in this. It actually features a polyamorous relationship, so as well as having the Dracula character and Constanta encounter the first bride. We also have another wife who's brought into the picture, as well as another husband, and the relationship that forms between them, and particularly the two wives, is absolutely gorgeous. And I think there is some trauma bonding going on there, but their relationship, it's just beautiful. It's so well done, and this shows polyamory in a way that I haven't seen it written before. And obviously this also, it isn't heteronormative because you have the love between the two women, so you have that gorgeous sapphic romance in here, and they also have this really lovely relationship with the third husband as well. And it's really the three of them working together, and then this is a sort of love letter, and what she describes as a letter of confession as well to Dracula. And you find out straight away, as soon as you open this, that she and the others have killed Dracula. So not a spoiler, it happens like page 2. It hooks you from the start. It's also it's so good at showing history. It's so well written between the different time periods. It's just fascinating. I will say, if you want a super neat happily ever after, might not be the book for you, but if you're looking for a gorgeously written romantasy book with a sapphic romance or a polyamorous romance, and also one that shows toxic dynamics but realistically, then I would definitely pick this one up.
Number 2 is Rain and Ruin. This is a self-published novel, and just like I said a little while ago that some people might prefer novels that were published a while ago if they don't like how romantasy tends to be right now, you can also look into the self-published space, because obviously an author that self-publishes doesn't necessarily have to do what the publisher wants them to do. They have a little bit more freedom to take a genre in a different direction. This book is set in the Levant, and our main character, Samira, is the daughter to the Sultan. She wants to become Sultana. She wants to be the person who takes over for her father when he eventually passes away. That is sort of her political goal. He has some form of dementia throughout this book. He's losing his memory, he's losing his mental capacity, and it puts a lot of pressure on the situation because a woman is not supposed to become Sultana. She is, but she's supposed to marry a man and then basically be a figurehead while the Sultan rules. The small council is trying to force her to choose a husband and to marry so that they know who will ultimately be the leader when her father passes away. Her father has always been pro her becoming the leader, but because of his dementia and his loss of his mental capabilities, he is unable to help her with this political situation. This is almost entirely a book of political machinations and court politics. You are not going to see a lot of action. It's going to be a lot of conversation. It's a lot of subtle maneuverings and shiftings to try to accomplish her goal. She is a very intelligent woman and she leads with that. And it also kind of explores the necessity for a lot of women to be perfect when they are in these sort of roles. She can never mess up, and the stakes feel high if she ever comes close to any sort of misstep, because the difference between her becoming Sultana and her becoming a figurehead wife type figure to someone who she doesn't like is probably the difference between a conversation that goes well and a conversation that goes poorly. While we have this power struggle and all of these people with different ideas and all these different court politics and political machinations, we have a man who's visiting in order to form an alliance with the Sultanate. And he is obviously going to become the love interest. She is very presentable and polished and always acting in a way that's professional and perfect. And he is someone who definitely lives more in the moment. So we definitely have the balance with the romance side of the book with that. But another thing I kind of love about this book is that even though they're friends throughout most of the book, they are basically friends, because she has so much pressure and responsibility on her that she cannot just choose to fall in love with a random man if it doesn't help her reach her goal. So in order for the romance to sort of happen, they have to find loopholes and ways around how things are already set up. Now, one reason I would recommend this to people who wish they like romantasy but don't like romantasy is because I probably wouldn't recommend this to someone who likes a lot of the popular romantasies right now, because it is so vastly different. They're not very similar, other than the fact that they both have fantasy and romance. If you want something to be fast-paced, this is probably not for you. It's a little bit slower paced, it's a lot more about conversation, and it's, like I said, almost completely about core politics. So this is not for you if you don't want a book that is a little bit slower paced and kind of takes a completely different direction with the genre altogether.
Okay, for book number 1, I'm going to finish with something that is absolutely full of heart and charm, and that is Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater, and this is part of the Regency Fairy Tales series. I also absolutely love 10,000 Stitches, which is the second book. Okay, how to describe this? It's Regency era England for a start, and it's set in London, and it's very, I think, Pride and Prejudice meets Howl's Moving Castle. Now, I will say that this is often branded as historical fantasy or as cozy fantasy, but really the romance is just as important to the plot as the fantasy and the historical setting, so I definitely think that it also falls into the romantasy genre. And despite being cozy, these books are never frivolous. They weave in so much political and social commentary, which I just absolutely loved, and the historical elements are so well done as well. Our heroine, Dora, she loses half of her soul to a fairy after a very bad encounter with him involving a pair of scissors. And because of this, she loses the ability to feel, or at least to recognise, her emotions, or a lot of her emotions. Everything is kind of dulled, and Dora has a pretty flat effect. She's socially awkward, but she doesn't really realise it. She's very direct, she's very honest, and she is kind, but she's not nice. And there is definitely a difference there, and I really, really liked the way that her character was portrayed. Now, I will say her character is definitely autistic coded, and the author has confirmed that it is a metaphor for neurodivergence and that she's neurodivergent herself. So I have to say, I'm diagnosed with autism myself, and I think if you're neurodivergent, you might recognise yourself in Dora. So some of the things that I picked up on, for example, is Dora isn't able to feel embarrassment. She isn't able to recognise that embarrassment, which, like, same. And it's not that they don't compare autistic people to having half a soul or anything like that. It's nothing like that, but it is really good representation. As for our male love interest, Lord Saucier, he is definitely also a very kind protagonist, so there's none of that toxicity going on in their relationship either. I will say he falls a little bit into the kind of grumpy male lead trope. However, Dora isn't a ray of sunshine, so it's definitely not grumpy sunshine trope. The romance that they have, it's really witty and it's really heartfelt, and whilst it's not enemies to lovers, but when they start, they do have I don't know, a little bit of a difficult dynamic just at first, but they're never cruel or mean to one another or anything like that. And the relationship, it isn't insta-love, and it develops very naturally, very organically, and it's just beautifully written. The entire series is really gorgeously written. Like, the writing, it's just really great writing. So if one of your complaints is poor writing, like, throw that out the window for this one, because this series is so well written. Overall, a really good balance of coziness and whimsy, but definitely not frivolity, and it definitely has that social and political undercurrent as well. And yeah, I absolutely adore these. So there you have it. Those are mine and Alison's top 10 romantasy books for people who don't normally jive with the genre. And it's totally fair if this genre isn't for you. It's not for everyone, but we do think that there's some hidden gems in it. Thank you so much to Alison for coming up with this really brilliant idea. It's been so great to collaborate with her. And if you've come here from Alison's channel, welcome. I hope you stick around. And if you haven't met Alison yet, then please do head over to her channel. I'll have it linked in the description. If you've read any of these, do let me know what you thought, and if you've got any of your own recommendations of romantasy books for people who don't like romantasy, then please do drop them in the comments, because I would absolutely love to read them. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye!